Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? So very warm welcome. My name is Silver Tamber, and I'm one of the founders of Estonishing Evenings. Those of you who are here for the first time, then Estonishing Evenings was started by four like-minded individuals about 2 years ago. And I think the mic is it okay now? Yeah, good. Okay, because I could hear like many voices here. So Estonishing Evenings was started by four like-minded Estonians. What was common was that we all lived abroad at some point in our lives, and we wanted to have an event in Tallinn where people from other countries who have come to live here and Estonians can meet and can learn more about each other, and the people who have come from other countries can learn more about Estonia. And we've had very different events on very diverse subjects, starting from introduction to Estonia to covering working culture, religion, history, entrepreneurship, and we've had a couple of political debates as well before each major election. The last one was in May before the European Parliament election. And we had a nice summer break, and we're back, and we're starting today starting new season with an event on Estonia's image. And it's called Estonia as a Wunderkind, myth or reality. And we're taking a closer look at the image of Estonia abroad and the perception of Estonia and the reality. And so we've invited here as our guests tonight Maris Hellerand, Katariina Sova, who's from Germany. Maris is from Estonia. Sten Damkivi should be here as well in any minute, who's also an Estonian. And Dario Caven, who's originally from Switzerland, by the way. But he's lived in Estonia for a long time. The event will be streamed as well on Estonishing Evenings Facebook page as well as Estonian World's Facebook page. So I forgot to say, my main job is actually running Estonian World, which is an English language Estonian online magazine. But I'm actually doing a presentation here as well. So I haven't done any presentations usually. I'm usually moderating. But because of the topic and because I've covered the subject for many years, I'm doing the presentation tonight on the Estonia's image. So if we can start the presentation, that would be great. And I'm taking you to a journey through some of the milestones starting from early 1990s. And we're going to take a look at the headlines at the international media throughout those years up to the 2019. So if we can get the presentation up, that would be great. Yeah, okay. So can we have it on a large screen as well, please? Yeah, okay, great. So let's start. This is Estonia in the late 1980s. Raise your hands who remembers that kind of Estonia. Okay, a few people. Are you all Estonians? Actually, that's my next question was, can you raise your hands who's from Estonia? Who are Estonians? Okay, great. So a little bit less than half, I think. Now, I'm old enough to remember that kind of Estonia too. And it's those people who were not here at that time, who were not born, probably might think, oh, this might be made up. Actually, it's not made up. Estonia did look like that by the late 1980s. I do remember the shops, empty shops. This is a queue for the bread, actually. The shop is a bread shop somewhere in Tallinn. And I do remember the smell in those shops as well. Actually, wasn't that pleasant, apart from the fact that they were empty. Move on a little bit. This is 1991, just August 1991, or somewhere, I think it's 23rd of August 1991, after the failed coup in Estonia and in Moscow, where the old Soviet hardliners tried to get rid of Gorbachev, who was the reform-minded last Soviet leader, and also sent in special troops to Estonia. But this picture is taken after third aid failed and those tanks are on its way out from Estonia. And Estonia regained its independence, became independent officially 20th of August 1991. And moving on, just a couple of things. Obviously, when we're talking about foreign media coverage of Estonia, some of the milestones here are pre-digital, taken from a pre-digital age. So it wasn't that easy to find foreign coverage or articles from the first half of 1990s. So I've just highlighted some of the milestones that were important for Estonia, and some of those milestones were covered by the foreign media as well. But there are some which Estonians were quite proud of themselves. So this one, that's when we got our own money, Estonian krone, Estonian krone, that was reintroduced in June 1992, and that was very important because to have our own money coming from the Soviet financial system was one of the first steps that formed the basis of the future stable economy. Moving on, as you can see, that flag there, it's our national flag, but it's upside down. And the picture is taken from the Barcelona Olympics in 1992, when Erika Salumäe became the first Estonian sportswoman then to win again at the Olympic Games since we regained independence. So the last time someone from the Republic of Estonia won was before the Second World War. I guess it might have been the Berlin Olympics. And that was an important moment again. But yeah, indeed, Estonia had just regained independence, and so they got actually the flag upside down. They couldn't even get the flag right up. But anyway, apart from that, obviously, emotional moment. And again, I guess, that might have been covered by the foreign media in terms of Olympics. And this is one of the headlines from 1992 from the New York Times. Actually, I've used a lot of New York Times headlines because they have a really good archive, even for the pre-digital age. And as you can see from the headline, it's not that positive, and actually it depicts the reality. Post-Soviet Baltic republics still stunted and struggling. It's a kind of picture that's pretty accurate. That's how the situation was back then. But moving on a little bit about first elections. Re-elections after we regained independence in autumn 1992. Lennart Meri became a president. Mart Laar and his party, or the coalition, which is called Isamaa, pro-Patria, won elections. We have Isamaa right now, still have the Isamaa, but it's a very different Isamaa. But I'm not going there because it's a long story, but it's not exactly the same Isamaa anymore that was Mart Laar's Isamaa back in 1992, which was very economically liberal, very sort of forward-looking, pro-Europe, etc. But this is one of the headlines when they won. This is the reality again, of course. First winter, this guy is Mart Laar here. In the middle of angry protesters. I don't know exactly where was this taken, but obviously it was a very hard time, lots of hardship, social security almost non-existent. This was the reality. But what Mart Laar's government did was they privatized state-owned companies, they introduced flat tax, taxes were quite low in order to also attract foreign investment. But of course, it was a hard time for many people. And as you can see, facing angry pensioners. But this is, I don't know if how many of you know, but there's a little old British story, and I think it was made into TV series as well, about Thomas the Tank Engine. And it was called the little engine that could. And sometime in 1993 or 1994, someone said about Estonia, it was one of the American magazines, but I couldn't verify which one was it. I heard that story from before, and later Mart Laar wrote a book called The Little Country That Could. So someone compared Estonia to Thomas the Tank Engine. So that they're a small country, but suddenly kind of, pulling through and punching above its weight. And here we go, in 1994, Mart Laar is writing for the New York Times. And again, he's already on that position where he thinks that he can teach Russians a thing or two. The headline says the Russians need more shock therapy, not less. New York Times writing in 1994 about Estonia's reforms, economic success, but it's about the time when the first reformist government already had some infighting, so it was about to collapse, and it did collapse by September 1994, so roughly about 2 years they were in power. And of course, talking about headlines throughout the year, again, as I said, I mentioned some of the things that put Estonia in international news, and sadly, this is one of them. We are actually just 4 days away from this sad event where a ship called Estonia was on its way from Tallinn to Stockholm during the stormy night, and it sank. Over 800 people lost their lives. And of course, that was in international news because it was one of the worst disasters in Europe, maritime disasters in Europe since the Second World War. Arvo Pärt, of course, again, Estonians are very proud of him, but in late 1994, it was actually the time when many Estonians probably first time heard about him because he had emigrated to Estonia. In 1980, I think, he went to live in Germany and Austria. But in 1994, I was at high school, and this is the first time I heard about him, and that was because his album "The Tome" was nominated for a Grammy Award. And of course, now we know that he's been the most performed living composer for the last, I think, 7 years. And he indeed, a lot of the foreign media or international media has written about him. But that album, was nominated in 1994. And okay, moving on a few years, 1996, the internet, right? Well, the picture is actually taken, I think, 1996, and why it's here is because, okay, that was not at the time reported in the international press, but this is the first step why, 10 years later, a lot of the foreign journalists started reporting about us, because that's the first step in our digital story. The process was called Tiger Leap, and our president at the time, Lennart Meri, introduced that. But apparently it was actually Toomas Hendrik Ilves's idea, who was born in the US, very sort of IT savvy, and he was Estonia's ambassador in the United States at the time. And he came up with this idea to have a computer in every Estonian school. And it was called Tiger Leap. But Lennart Meri and I think Jaak Aaviksoo, who was the education minister at the time, they sort of introduced that in public. And indeed, it did work. I mean, in a sense that a lot of people really, that's the start of the kind of, IT or digital career. Okay, another little thing. Who knows who's that on a picture? Yeah, indeed, yeah. Why I included that, so I have to say, probably, Okay, let's put it this way. I'll give you a little personal story first. I moved to London in 2000, I think it was. And roughly about that time, all around London, even in London Tube, where you see all the ads, were like, oh, this ad was all over the place. And of course, it's Estonian supermodel Carmen Kass. I have to say, probably a lot of people abroad wouldn't know that she was Estonian. But when you lived in, when you just moved from the country that no one knew about, it was quite nice to see someone from Estonia being, all over the place. And of course, that started another myth, was that Estonia's got more supermodels per capita than any other country. I'm not sure if it's true, but Carmen Kass certainly was a very successful supermodel at the time. Okay, this is another article at the New York Times in 2001, and it is about Lennart Meri. Also, a picture of Lennart Meri here with Bill Clinton. I think at that time, a lot of Estonia's reputation was in the hands of characters like Lennart Meri, or before that Mart Laar and also Toomas Hendrik Ilves, because we were not so well known yet for anything. And then those guys like Lennart Meri, he was a character. When he met foreign leaders like Jacques Chirac or Bill Clinton, he kind of made his mark. Okay, so another headline from 2001, Estonia won the Eurovision. And again, I was in England at the time, and I was working in a pub at the time, actually. I just moved, and I did lots of different jobs. And I remember that night when Estonia won. And I have to say, British, they're kind of sarcastically about Eurovision, It's a sort of flamboyant event, and but they take it with a sense of humor. I mean, they love it, but they don't take it maybe as seriously as we did, which is kind of natural because, as big nation like they are, they have lots of famous pop musicians. But for us, again, it was another way to put ourselves on a map. Okay, this. This, as you can see, is a Estonian ID card. Actually, you know what? It's real. It was presented to former US president in 2014 when he visited Estonia during the. So it was just to calm us down because it was 5 months after Crimea and Eastern Ukraine. But anyways, so that was printed and given to him. By the way, it looks like it's expired recently, 2nd of September. And I hope it worked, or anyway. But why I included it here was because around that time, in 2002, it was that time when a lot of our digital services were introduced, like including the ID card. And it was introduced during the Mart Laar's second government. Right, so, here you see there is still rather, headline that shows us not in a very positive light about HIV, which is still a problem. And again, now you don't really hear much about it, including the local media. But in Europe, the high HIV rates were one of the highest in Europe, basically, in Estonia, per capita. So, but even, New York Times wrote about that time. Okay, moving on a little bit. 2004, very important year again for Estonia. Estonia joined the NATO and joined the European Union. Here is the news about how Estonia and 7 other countries joined the US and Iraq, which again was criticized by so-called old Europe, including by the French President Jacques Chirac. But we wanted to show solidarity with America. We're talking a little bit about branding as well. So this around that time when that logo was introduced, Welcome to Estonia. And at the same time, we joined the European Union. Here we go. So we're getting some cheap flights coming in. I do remember flying with EasyJet from London to Estonia at the time, and of course, all the stag nights became popular. And as we can see, even that made international headlines. So 29 pounds is all it takes for the hottest boys' night out in Eastern Europe, and of course still Eastern Europe. That's how we described here in 2005. And the article is about Estonia, how a lot of guys are flying in to have cheap nights there. Party capital of the year, Tallinn, Estonia, again 2006. But things are about to change, and this is a little bit different story starts now. So enter Estonia and enter Skype. So first, we got those party nights, but then something serious is happening here. we have here, I think, Sten, you were one of the first employees, if correct me, at Skype. So later on, maybe you will have you can ask from the first employee, what was it like to work at Skype? But anyway, and that actually is starting to change the narrative as well. You see New York Times article from 2005, and the first sentence is, visiting the offices of Skype feels like stumbling onto a secret laboratory in a James Bond movie, where mad scientists are hatching plots for world domination. So it is changing the narrative. Another article about, cyber cafes and the flat tax, talking about different kind of Estonia. Of course, that made the news in 2007, which was about removal of Soviet era memorial. And we had riots here for, I think it was a couple of days. I wasn't actually living in Estonia at the time, but that made international news. And of course, what happened was, there what happened was basically that Estonia turned it into its own advantage. So I think it's latest been called the first cyber war, because during those riots, when Estonia moved that bronze monument, a lot of our institutions suddenly were attacked. So it was a cyber attack. But again, you see, this is a little bit, the article is written a bit later, but what happened was Estonia actually then learned from that experience, and in a process became one of the cybersecurity leaders, as we're now considered in terms of know-how. Okay, this is another thing that made international news, was Let's Do It World, which was started here in Estonia in 2008. During one day, I think it was about 50,000 people got together to clean up the country, and that's AFP news, which that news is a bit, I think it's from 2011, but it was started in 2008, and as we know, it's happening now annually. Just a few days ago, we had a World Cleanup Day. Again, another milestone, while Europe or Eurozone was in a crisis, Estonia actually joined the Eurozone. And that showed Estonia again from very different light. While Greece was in crisis, sort of Portugal as well, Ireland, countries part of the sort of, so-called old Europe, Estonia actually joined the Eurozone at time, which to join the Eurozone, you have to have a very strict budget discipline. And so that's Edward Lucas, who's the senior editor of The Economist. And why I included it was because I interviewed him in 2012. It was one of the first interviews I did. I was in London, and we started this magazine called Estonian World, and I thought, let's interview Edward Lukas. He had written a lot about Estonia. He was the senior editor at The Economist, and of course he knew Estonia very well. He'd been here for many years. And to be fair, he had a very close relationship with Toomas Hendrik Ilves, who was the president at the time, and he always praised Estonia. And also, I thought, let's interview him. But why I included it here was really what he said, was that Estonia is now an insider, not an outsider anymore. And what he meant was that if before we were like this, sort of kind of poor Eastern European country, and the others were sort of looking down at us, he said he was at one of the conferences, I think it was the EU conferences, just after Estonia joined the Eurozone. And suddenly he saw that, a lot of guys from sort of old Europe are sort of, circling the Estonian representation and sort of asking kind of, almost like advice. And so that's what he meant, was that, we are not an outsider anymore. We are actually, okay, we're a small country, but, we, taken seriously now. Of course, that's around 2011, 2012. That's it's the start of the sort of startup scene as well. So what Skype really did was that it's kind of started the sort of Estonian startup ecosystem, and so from that moment on, we start to see a lot of those headlines about Estonian startups. And not just startups, but of course also the digital state e-governance. So I would say like from 2011 until up to 2016 was probably the most positive coverage we've seen on Estonia. You hardly find anything negative there. Around that time also, that term was born, hashtag Estonian Mafia, which was coined by one of the American venture capitalists. And he said that because he was in Silicon Valley and he saw an accelerator where there was, like, I think 20 companies, and out of that, like 5 or 6 for Estonian companies or startups. And he said, "What's happening?" And that's, he's sort of going, hey, it's like Estonian Mafia in that, in that sense. This picture is actually taken from across the road from Lift 99, which is the co-working space. So it's not the original wall was at Ravala Puiestee, but this is one of the newer versions of that. And headline after headline like that. Is Estonia going to be the next Silicon Valley? How did Estonia become a leader in technology? Estonia, the digital republic, this is just a small fraction of those articles, which you could probably find, hundreds. And talking about English language media, but also you can find them in French and German and probably Japanese and etc. Again, this is quite a recent one, yeah. But of course, what you don't see, this is where when we say myth versus reality, is that, during those years, you can see lots of those positive headlines and coverage abroad. But you don't see that. No one's talking about that we also have, poverty. We have people who've been left behind, or if you're looking also Eastern Estonia, the Estonian-Russian situation there, you don't see that. And I lived abroad. I remember I used to come only on holidays. And of course, when we started Estonian World, which was also writing only about positive stories, I remember a lot of people telling me, but this is not all, what it's like, when you're seeing things through the rose-tinted colors. And I moved back to Estonia back in 2014, and of course then I started, going around again in Estonia after living. I've been away for 10 years, and I started going around a bit more. And you see, of course, the different side as well. And again, that doesn't take away what we've achieved, but of course that's where we can discuss myth versus reality. This picture is taken by Birgit Püve, who is a very good photographer. She's taken a lot of photos in those, rural areas around Estonia. Also, again, from that sort of era, 2011 till 2016, it wasn't just startups, but also, other events were covered by international press. Of course, the song celebration and anything related to music. Okay, this is also an interesting example. It was in late 2014 when Estonia became the first country that was legalizing civil partnership. And that also made news because Estonia was the first out of the former Soviet-controlled countries. As you know, or may know, this process got stuck because at the time the government between the Reform Party, the Social Democratic government, legalized it, but they didn't. They didn't pass the implementing acts. So it got in a sort of legal limbo, but that's a different story. But anyway, it made news at the time. And it's this guy, he's Stephen Fry, he's a British comedian, and he actually, after Estonia legalized that, took also news, but that's taken before, I think that. And so he actually said that in one of those British programs, said, in Estonia they believe that if you point at the rainbow, your finger will fall off, which is poking at the fact that, there are still people who are a bit homophobic, basically. But yeah. But okay, this is a little bit changing now. This is late 2016 when the government changed. Jüri Ratas became prime minister. And of course the center parties, because the center party had an agreement with Putin's party in Russia. That's the headline we saw. Of course, there were more fears at the time. Maybe some were perhaps we didn't need to worry that much looking at it back compared to the situation now, but there you go. A little bit of branding as well, things starting going a little bit down. So another thing, interesting example. This is, we have the thing called Enterprise Estonia, those who maybe not aware of it, but they are responsible for Estonia's image abroad and promoting our country. And they came up with this new branding, and it included that green thing there, which is supposed to be bolder, but some people compared it to puking hedgehog. So anyway, they dumped that. It's not there anymore. I think we're going to discuss later maybe that a little bit as well, but if we have time, about the branding in general. But they also introduced new font, so I think that font is still in place. For Estonian institutions and tourism agencies to use and all that. Just quickly, at the same time, a Dutch branding specialist called Peter Kenty proposed his own concept. So that was his concept, which he said he's gonna give it for free if someone wants. But anyway, Enterprise Estonia didn't want it. But anyway, we got our name from that, actually. Astonishing Evenings, that's what we got. We got it from that. We thought it's a great name. Peter was very happy about it, too. And another, this is from 2017, when Estonia held the EU presidency. Very positive headline again. Estonia did it well. Moving to present day. So, this is from this year, after March elections, when the new government was formed by the center party EKRE and Isamaa. And now we see headlines like that. Estonia's golden image threatened by a rise of far-right nationalists. How's that? So, this is Estonia's image 2019. Right. Well, if you search the headlines, this is what comes up now. Another one. And another one. So, this is one of the latest. which you can find. And I think the New York Times as well. This was the latest you can find on New York Times. Yeah. If you're looking at the long list of archive about headlines on New York Times, this is 2019. So yeah, that's it really. That's it. So if you wanna ask any questions, I'm happy to answer. This is just a little overview of the milestones in the media. Of course, there are lots more, but you know we cannot cover them all. I tried to give you a little overview. If you have any questions, then my colleague Nele has got a mic and can give you a microphone. Looks like all clear. So if we got no more questions, then we're gonna basically soon carry on, have a little break, and we have a discussion, and then we carry on with Maris, Katariina, Dario, and Sten. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
happening. But it worked. We like in my time, the audience grew by a factor of 4. It's huge now. Yeah. Well, interest in Estonia went up as well.
So welcome back, and I'm honored to welcome here 4 distinguished guests. I'm gonna introduce them, starting with Katarina Sova. She's a linguist, writer, and hobby poet from Germany. She first visited Estonia in 2011 after watching a documentary about Tallinn on German television. That first visit made her fall in love with the country immediately. And in 2015, she followed her heart and moved to Tallinn. She has worked for Transferwise and the Estonian presidency of the Council of the EU in 2017, and currently she is a creative writer and translator in Pipedrive, which is an Estonian startup, one of the most successful ones, I believe. She's also a freelance writer with her own company. Moving forward, Maris Hellerand. Maris is passionate about telling stories from and about Estonian people, businesses, and artists. She's a journalist who has been working for several international media channels and communicating in English, German, and Swedish. As a communications professional, she has also been in charge of international communications of many large-scale and high-level cultural and political events in Estonia, including the Estonian Song and Dance Celebration, Tallinn Music Week, Lennart Meri Conference, and also Estonian Presidency of the Council of the EU. Moving forward, Sten Tamkivi is a software entrepreneur. He is a co-founder of Teleport, which builds software that shows the best places to live and work in the world. After the acquisition of Teleport by Topia, which I believe is a British company or American? Global. He became the chief product officer at Topia. Sten founded apparently the first digital media agency in Estonia at the age of 18. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then he joined Skype as an early executive and responsible for R&D offices in Estonia. He values a tolerant, open, and creative society, speaks up for entrepreneurship, and supports the startup movement as well as IT education. Tara Kavin. No, I still didn't get it right. I find it difficult to pronounce the last name, I'm sorry. You correct me afterwards. He's a former editor of ERR News, copywriter and marketing strategist. Dario has embraced living in Estonia since 2006 and written about what he sees as a discrepancy between the perception and reality of Estonia on numerous occasions. So, you saw the little journey overview I made about international media coverage. So perhaps we'll start with that. If you compare, and we're talking about perception versus, myth versus reality. So maybe you'll start with Katarina, because you came from Germany, and Tara as well, you came from Switzerland. So when you what was your perception of Estonia and what's the reality? Let's start with that.
Well, my perception of Estonia, I like to compare it with falling in love. It's like, at first you're like basically in heaven, everything is wonderful, but then after a while, you slowly wake up and face the reality, and I think that describes it very well. So my image or perception of Estonia when I moved to Estonia 4 years ago was mainly shaped by, like beautiful nature, then like this digital wonderland, Estonia, and also like this shiny tech and startup scene. But of course I had only like this outside perspective. So when I moved here, this outside perspective changed to an inside perspective. So I actually faced the reality and the everyday life. For the record, like my story with Estonia is still a wonderful love story. So, but I also saw like all like negative things or the things that can be improved here in Estonia. Still, I have a very good and positive perception of Estonia, and I think Estonia is doing very well and has also a very good image, still has a very good image in the world. What I really enjoy seeing here is, especially in the last 4 years I've been living here, is how diverse Estonia has become over the years in almost every aspect of life. But the thing is, we can't and shouldn't take it for granted. So we basically have to be an advocate for this openness and this diversity that we enjoy now.
And so how long have you been here?
Over 3 years.
Okay. So Daria, you're from Switzerland, and how long have you been here actually?
13 going on 14 years.
Wow, that's a long time though. Yeah. And you speak Estonian too now, I think.
I do, yeah.
And you obviously worked in the media yourself now for a long time. And I know you have, I think you criticized in the past as well the way that some of the things are portrayed versus the reality. Is that correct?
I have, well, yes, I've done that on lots of occasions. But the point is that I think by kind of overemphasizing the positive, what you do is you kill a lot of very, very valuable stuff. You kill off a reality component that in itself is very valuable as well. For example, I don't see how a country can illustrate itself as a country of good problem solvers if you don't admit to the existence of the occasional problem. So my criticism has come in mainly where people have tried to either by means of going for a particular ideology or a particular kind of sales angle or PR angle about this country, where they've tried to paint with the broad brush and screen out some of the difficult things. Like a good example that you brought in your presentation before is HIV, which is actually was interesting. I think in my first year at ERR, very early on in the year, the British ambassador and one other ambassador spoke in the Estonian parliament and were actually talking about an actual HIV epidemic. And I was working in the news media at the time, and I was like, what? Like I certainly didn't read about this in the Estonian media, in either of the two available languages. So I think a society and a state and a country on the whole get stronger if they face up to the issues that they have and try to overcome them, rather than try to silence them. Another good example very recently, again, is the whole topic with Nazism and the Holocaust. It's very, very easy for the Russian media to portray Estonia as a country of fascists, mainly because the topic here has not been dealt with to the last point it could have been dealt with. This could, like Germany did it, this could have been taken care of a long time ago. Face up to what happened, come out with, I don't know, yet another commission might not be the best idea, but get it all out in the open, get it done, move on. That works better than pretending it never happened.
It's not going to happen now, though.
It might actually, seeing as the topic actually came up. This is an interesting thing. I find myself in arguments with people on Facebook all the time. And
interesting.
And one of the things that recently came up is, and I am dead serious when I say that, right up to the emergence of EKRE, no one I ever met in this country cared about the fact that you could buy calendars in Prisma depicting a guy wearing a Waffen-SS uniform. No one cared. No one did. Now it's a topic. So maybe it's not exclusively negative. Yeah.
I think... No, I guess some people did care, but I get your point, though. I think, and I agree to a certain extent. I think I remember myself actually a few years ago going to a small shop in Tõrva and seeing it was a bookshop, and actually a book about SS was like the first book I saw. It was all over the place, basically, so you would have not, I would have not expected, but yeah, there you go. But okay, Maris.
Yes, I thank you. I wanted to add actually another aspect to your very nice overview. What I missed was one topic that I have been dealing with ever since I've worked for international media in Estonia, which is since 2011-12. Estonia was almost a one-topic country for a long time. All these things are wonderful, but for hard news, hard politics, Estonia was a country at a border to Russia that is either eagerly preparing to defend itself or needing protection by the allies. So the fear of Russia, the immediate danger of war, of attack has been, like I say, is Narva next, was my bread and butter for a long time. So, to create other narratives, competing narratives, has been a massive effort, I think, by many organizations in Estonian public sector, not the least by the EU presidency. And that has been something that successfully has at least offered a competing story to this fear of Russia story. Because by creating these articles and these stories and pictures about Estonian Defense League soldiers running around in the woods, if that keeps filling the airwaves constantly, this transmits a message. This is a dangerous place. You don't want to go there as a tourist. You don't want to put your money there. But at the same time, we can't also be too negligent of the danger. So it's a very delicate balance to keep, and it's a topic that's never going to go away. Now the question is how we keep this balance and how we build and offer additional narratives. And here is what I call soft power. Even the hard tech is actually soft power in this context. You create a picture of a country that is likable, where you have people, artists who are creative, who are nice people, who you can identify with. And it's one thing to create these messages for decision makers, for politicians within our allied countries. Another thing also to create quite wide, broad messages for voters. So I see that as my mission of security policy in a way to tell the German TV viewers about the Estonian song celebration. What a wonderful country it is. Everyone comes together, is happy, friendly, and sings. And it's actually a security topic or the driving force behind doing it is security. And one more thing before I talk too much is I read a very, very interesting comparative study about the image of Estonia and Bulgaria in German media. And Bulgaria is basically considered as a totally corrupt country where horse carriages are the main mean of transport. And Estonia, the glitzy Wunderkind. But one very interesting aspect that the author points out is every Bulgarian expert on each panel like that goes on bashing the country and being really critical about the government, passionate sort of criticism. Every Estonian defines him or herself as an advocate of the country, as an ambassador of the country. And thus we all kind of create this picture that is maybe part myth. But I have done a story about the HIV epidemic every single year for the 1st of December.
For the Estonian or the German media?
The German media. I don't work for the Estonian media, sadly. So.
But Sten, I mean, you've lived abroad as well in California for a few years, and you're obviously very much associated with the Estonian startup scene, IT scene. You know, you've been part of that since the Skype story, which I briefly mentioned as well. I mean, what do you think? Is there any discrepancy between the image abroad and was the reality?
Well, I think it's the sort of to go deeper on the point of balance and finding that balance. It's like there is no one reality. There are like 1.3 million realities of Estonians living, the different sort of places where they're in, the languages they speak, what do they do for a living, do they go to school, have they retired? And sort of media picture is always a subjective choice of which of those voices you amplify. And so I'm, as an entrepreneur, and my job is not to promote Estonia. I tend to build companies and try to create something that when it becomes newsworthy, then there is like some amplification that we can, as entrepreneurs, and the Estonian tech scene actually is quite big on self-promotion around, or the self-promotion of the country around the world. And so the way I've internalized it myself is that if you believe, and as an Estonian I do believe, that the world is a richer place when there is yet another tiny nation with their own special secret language with 1 million speakers, like you can logically start deducting like what needs to happen for that to be true in 100 years. For 1 million people to exist and be able to speak their own language and have some control of some territory and have some value set that they enforce and all of that, it doesn't matter what the 1 million think, it matters what the 7.5 billion think. And if you're a 0.03% or whatever we are in the world population, then anything that makes more people around Estonia to say that actually the world would be a worse off place if this thing didn't exist tomorrow is a sort of naturally a good step towards that, and that's the soft power. And it doesn't really matter if it's Aivo Pätt or if it's, I don't know, Erkki Nool winning in the Olympic Games, or somebody who likes the Eurovision song, or somebody who makes free calls using Skype or sends money with TransferWise. It doesn't matter. Like, these are the sort of positive things that create net value coming from Estonia and benefiting the rest of the world. And for me, that is sort of the approach, or it's not about us, it's about what do we talk about Estonia. It's like kind of an egocentric way of thinking about it. It's like, what are the things that Estonia can contribute to the world that we can talk about it? And this is where I liked very much your point of, for example, like there is a way of talking about HIV epidemic about in a way that things are shit and we can't handle it and everybody's dying, which I think is not true. But there is a way which I think would be the positive Estonian way of, this is the HIV problem we have, this is how we're solving it.
The current Estonian way is not to talk about it at all.
Yeah, but so maybe somebody is not solving it. And maybe that's why the story is missing. That's what I'm kind of thinking.
This is the thing, I agree with Maris's point about soft power and establishing Estonia in the actual consciousness of people everywhere on the planet, because next time this place disappears, somebody better miss it. I mean, this was the tragic of the 1940s, because there was no global media at the time. There was no internet or anything like that. Countries appeared like a blip on the map for 15, 20 years, and then disappeared again. But so this is an absolutely valid point. And of course, what Sten just said in terms of emphasizing the positive is also extremely important. The thing where I've been critical is where the whole thing translates into the everyday practical aspects of doing business in this country and with this country and living in this country and with the different things that are going on here. So, for example, in terms of HIV, and maybe not HIV directly, but related topics, there was this endless debate for the last, well, it wasn't an open and a big debate, but like a constant kind of simmering, ongoing thing about these needle exchanges in Tallinn and elsewhere in the country. And I'm from Zurich. My hometown in the early 1990s had the biggest open drug scene in Europe, believe it or not. There were literally, when I was a little kid, every single house entrance in the city center had blue lights so that the junkies wouldn't go there and try to find their veins. And there was literally a part of town where the police was picking dead people out of the trees. There's a very good English documentary somewhere online about it. How the whole thing was resolved was quite simple. In order to get rid of the whole heroin scene, they started handing out methadone, and that was it. That killed off the pushers, that killed off the dealers, and so on and so forth. So there is literally a proven recipe to get rid of the drug and the needle problem in this country for good. And it would not take a lot of money, it would not take a lot of effort, and it is not being done. It is just simply not being done because nobody manages to get over the initial prejudices that are keeping it from happening. So this would be an aspect like that. In terms of business, I'll shut up in a second. In terms of business, one thing that I would see as a problem, and that as a fact I've heard from Swiss business people is a problem, is that the perception of what constitutes good business and good business culture here in Estonia is different from how other countries sometimes see it. For example, a hugely negative example for the Swiss is how Estonian Air went belly up and how it was replaced by the Nordic Aviation Group. Because if you look at the lineup of how this happened and which people were involved and the complaints of the people who were at the bad end of the stick, this is actual corruption. In the Swiss and the German media, that's corruption. And here it's just like, we can't really pick them. There's only a handful of people who know this business. We're going to have to go on living with it. And so if you collide with this, if you have 500,000 to invest in a country and you see this wonderful positive outlook of everything, but then unfortunately end up looking at the numbers in detail and see like, this is slightly iffy, you might decide not to go for it. And so again, an open way of dealing with these problems would be healthier than just not wanting to talk about them.
We can, just to sort of complete the bashing section, I think we missed also the headline about money laundering. And I hope Aivar Rehe is being found today alive and well, and we are not faced with some horrible headlines tomorrow in this aspect. So there are, of course, discrepancies, and I think the picture, the image outside is not glitzy and spotless as we like to imagine. I mean, the topics like money laundering or social issues.
But this is a fantastic example. For full disclosure, I'm also on the board of a commercial bank in Estonia, besides my tech ventures, and money laundering is a massive issue, and it's a reputational issue. Like nobody will come to you and say that, hey, we looked at the numbers, you laundered money, or I'm not going to do business with you. But the message is that, hey, we read about Latvia, and now you guys too, we can't do business here. It's a way more PR based, and that I would bucket in the place where Estonia does have solutions. Like if you introduce e-residency, if you are the only nation on the planet that offers secure identity to people to trade online, if you set these requirements to operate the company here and open a bank account and you fulfill all these requirements, like if you're a, warlord from South America and you want to launder money somewhere, why do you go somewhere where you have to give fingerprints to a NATO member first? Like it doesn't compute, and we can actually create an environment where we can sort of, okay, money laundering, it's an issue, this is how we're going to solve it. And I think that sort of is a potentially a net positive solutions-oriented way of talking about it, not just bragging about like one shiny part, which happens to be all right already.
But in order to achieve this, we really need to be very, very proactive and come up with these solutions and push it to the
And this proactivity is an interesting one, because I think one thing that is troubling quite a lot of young people that I know in the country who talk to their foreign friends and foreign media and whatnot is that, like, we are every day in today's political environment, we're running into the situation of being only reactive. Like, there is an interview this evening by an Estonian IT minister which supposedly is bashing Estonian startups. Since Friday, I've been dealing with calls from my county today, 7 different entrepreneurs who are worried about it and thinking, okay, what should we do? Should we say something? Should we? And so all of a sudden, there is this sort of 7 people who should be building their companies and sort of exporting services and bringing capital to Estonia, doing all that. They're worrying about what the minister is going to say on TV. And so getting out of this cycle of reactivity is super painful and super annoying. So for me, one of the outcomes of that is I become way more careful of picking my battles. Like, there are some fields where I can be an expert and I can go, like, I don't know, a few years ago, you didn't have that on the list, I missed. I wrote the longer op-ed in the Atlantic, which we actually called Estonia, little country that cloud. So to wordplay on that, and sort of you take this one very, very targeted hit, if you put like 10 hours or 20 hours of your time into doing something for Estonia, like better be on message and something like that. If everybody keeps running around and reacting to the bad things that somebody said, it's so energy exhausting.
But, I mean, you mentioned the current IT minister. I was about to move to the political question a bit later, but since you touched that, and you said, you know, the people are too reactive, but have they got, I mean, in your opinion, have they got reason to be concerned about it? I mean, the same IT minister, so those who are not aware, Sten is talking about Estonian IT minister called Kert Kingo, who is an EKRE minister, Estonian Conservative People's Party. And when she became minister, she said that she's not going to travel, even though IT minister is supposed to travel.
IT and foreign trade.
And sorry, IT and foreign trade. Because of the foreign trade, she's supposed to travel. And the other thing, she said she's not going to speak in English when she's abroad. So I don't know how much is truth in it. But I mean, you're saying people shouldn't be reactive, but at the same time, that is also obviously you can read it also in English language media about that minister, for example. You know, so what should we do then?
Well, in this scenario, hard to comment for me. I never met her. And what I see from her background and the first things she said doesn't seem like she is enjoying herself in that position rather than anybody else in that particular field of economy, which is foreign trade and IT. Meanwhile, what I've seen is super interesting thing is that the Estonian public officials, the unelected officials, have immediately started sort of finding their own channels. And like, as companies, you get much more requests from like the chancellor of this or the department head of that to get together. What are the problems? How can we help you? Can you join us in this meeting? Like all of this. So it's interesting to see how the system morphs around so that people who might be misplaced. And then you're looking, okay, why spend time on the gap if you can spend time on the places where action is going on?
Actually, a great example, jumping back to what you said before, focusing on one issue and doing what you can, is the green pledge by the tech companies. Because in a situation where we have climate denialists in the government, or climate change denialists, how do you say it?
Climate science denialists.
Climate science denialists in the government, and a lot of hot air going on. The business, the startup, the innovative sector is actually taking a lead here. So this is a fantastic example. I really hope I can sell this story to someone.
Yeah, it's an example where you can wait until somebody in the government or a minister tells you that this is on the agenda now, or you can create the agenda.
Yes, and I think this is extremely important as well. Like, one of my favorite publications over the last few years here in Estonia was a slightly weird report by KPMG and Tööandjate Keskliit that came out I think it was late 2016 or 2017, like on the state of Estonian exports. And what it was basically was the summary and the product of dozens and dozens of interviews that KPMG have been doing with company executives all around Estonia. And what struck me when I read it was the belief that everybody still had at the business level in the state, and how the state should be promoting Estonia as a brand, how the state should help companies go abroad and find their markets. And there were quotes in there from really, really big companies, like from people where you would think, they don't need help. Like, why are they even going on about this? But this sort of this reliance, this odd reliance on the government to take care of something that is in essence a matter of commerce and trade. I'm very, very glad, like, if that just goes away, because it's absurd.
Yeah, Estonia, I think has borrowed a great example in tech was a page borrowed from I think Israeli playbook. Was that Israel in 1970s, nobody wanted to invest in tech companies and startups, so they created a venture fund that was government money. The second it started working, they sold it to venture capitalists, and now the sector is working. And Estonia, I think that's the same way of intervening in sort of this. If there is a market failure, then you go in and you solve something, and then the private sector takes over. And in case of startups, in 2006, speaking if the story is true or not, if there is realism behind that, in 2003, Skype started in 2003, exited to eBay in 2005. In 2006, the entire total investment in Estonian startups was €1 million. Last year, it was $330 million or euros. So it's like a proper hockey stick curve. And at the same time, 5 years ago, Estonian startups employed 1,000 people. Today, it's 5,300. It's been growing like 30% year on year, like for the last 5 or 6 years. We're making about $700 million of revenues. So these are the pre-revenue startups, as is usually sort of the caricature. $700 million that new capital is coming to Estonia from our customers, not investors. So all of these numbers, like the obvious thing to do would be that, okay, if there is something like that happening, get out of the way. like remove any barrier there is for that to grow. And that, I think, has been this interesting dialogue that we've had with the government for the last 15, 20 years is that always, like, the default state is get out of the way, make it easier to found a company, make it easier to pay taxes, make it easier to do X, Y, Z. And there are a few named items where we can't do it as an industry, but we need everybody collectively to work, e.g. government, which is like education, for example. Like, it's pointless to make companies build elementary education. And this sort of sensible balance again, like, let's really, really think about it, what's the job of the government, and let's get out of the way on everything else is the model.
Okay, great. So, Catherine, talking about digital Estonia, e-Estonia as we call it. I mean, then obviously you just brought the example how the startup story released there and the numbers really back it up. But from your experience, I don't know how much personal experience have you had, but I know if you come from other countries, you also get something similar to ID card, right? Is it resident?
It's the same.
It's the same. So, and there were a few years, for example, there were problems with the Estonian ID cards. I think it was actually manufacturer's problem, wasn't it? But I mean, in your experience, I'll tell you another story. I just recently met some couple of Japanese guys, and they came here. They were here first time in Estonia, and of course they also had this perception that it's like a second Tokyo here, because they read in Japan how Estonia is a digital state and stuff. But of course, when they come here, it doesn't look like Tokyo, right? Which is good and bad, I guess. But from your experience, I mean, the digital Estonia. Does it really work for you? If you use the digital service and stuff. So, again, myth versus reality. When you read about it, for example, if you hadn't been here, you read something in German, the digital state, and you actually come and live here, does it actually work in real life like that?
It does. It really does. I mean, I'm coming maybe from a bigger country than Estonia is in size and in population, but when I think of Germany and its digital services, it's like basically more or less non-existent. And here in Estonia, it's well, it's for me still. I live here for a long time already, but still, it's kind of my little wonderland. And I'm always a little afraid when I go back to Germany, because I know, okay, it's not as good as in Estonia, and I even get from people who are still, or who are living in Germany, I still get the responses, oh my God, you're living in Estonia, everything is so much better there. And I know that especially nowadays, and I think a great impact made the Estonian presidency of the Council of the EU in 2017, when more and more people got aware of this digital state, Estonia, and people got more aware of what we are doing here, and so it has a very positive impact on the country of Estonia, and it gives us a very positive image. And I really enjoy all the e-services that I can use. Of course, not everything. It's not like everything is not black and white. So like there's some things that can be improved, of course. But still, I do really enjoy all the e-services here, and I wouldn't change back.
Daria, have you got a second opinion here?
Yeah, I'm from a famously complicated country. Like, we have 3 administrative levels. We've got compulsory military service. We've got a nightmare of bureaucracy, and it's all still on paper. And you run from one authority to the next. And one thing that I repeated a lot after I first came here was that leaving Switzerland officially, like to get like the last bit of paperwork done, took more than 6 months. Arriving here took 15 minutes. Like, back in the day, there was still the migration board that existed separately from the police, and it was like in a shabby office behind the bus station. And I remember going there, saying who I was and like what I needed to do, and I got this piece of paper where the lady had been nice enough to write down like 3 steps. It was like, get a signature from your landlord, go to the office of registers, and then come back here. Those were the 3 things. I did that all on the same day. And I was absolutely astounded when at the office of registers they told me that I didn't need to carry any piece of paper along. Like, are you sure you're not supposed to give me something? Because if I go back there empty, no, it's all fine. So I went back, signed a piece of paper at the migration board, and I think it was supposed to take 2 weeks, but 3 days later I had my ID card, and that was the end of it. And I mean, obviously this is the typical story that you hear at every panel debate where a foreigner is involved. But I think what happens here in Estonia quite a lot, also with locals, is obviously this is life here, and you get very, very used to it. Mm-hmm. So the consequence is a sort of constant whinge at a very, very high level. If people are unhappy with the way services work, I'm a Mac user. And it used to drive me insane that I couldn't use my computer to sign into the e-environments of some of the authorities. Now I have a mobile ID and my problem's solved. But basically, the point being that if I listen to somebody from among my friends back in Switzerland talk about how much time it took them to sell their car, it's just a nightmare. You have to draw up the contract, run from one office to the next. The whole process takes like more than a week. It's completely insane. Here, you download the sample from the website of the road administration, fill in the blanks, sign it digitally, upload it again, done. Fabulous. Obviously, it works.
Yeah, may I add like a little a personal story, because I think that describes it very well, or especially the difference between Germany and Estonia is in 1996, because you mentioned the Tiger Leap. In 1996, I went to primary school, so it was first grade. And back then, I couldn't ever imagine to have a computer in school. And here, like basically schools got connected to the internet, and I couldn't think of that. Even when I graduated from school, years later, we had like one room which was called the computer room, where we could use computers and the internet. And so I think that describes it very well, the difference between the digital Estonia and the rest.
In some occasions, I think the story has shot over the target because in Germany there's a very, very persistent myth that free Wi-Fi countrywide is a constitutional right of every Estonian. And I'm still puzzled why I do get this bill from Telia every month, you know. So some things are, yeah, show me, where is it? Which one is the...
What's also interesting is that you said total transparency before, and Toomas Hendrik Ilves has said on lots of occasions that basically all you need to do in order to combat corruption the way it exists in Bulgaria or the Ukraine or something like that is simply by getting rid of cash, because then everything becomes traceable. Yep. And this has led with some government authorities here to a very, very funny sort of culture of openness. Years ago, when I went to the tax board, and I was slightly worried because I was withdrawing quite a lot of money from a Swiss account using an EC card, and I was kind of worried whether that was being tracked or whether that but I would need to declare that and so on. And then the lady there at the tax board explained to me, just don't go beyond 15,000 a year. I was like, why? Well, you know, if we find that you cheat us or whatever, and we want legal help from Switzerland, they're not going to move a finger before we don't get to at least 15 grand. So just stay below that and you're fine. And I was like, okay, thank you, tax board. Very nice. And this sort of thing is extremely refreshing and very nice. Unfortunately, there is also a flip side of this whole thing. And obviously, while people are quite happy and ready to help you and give you tips like that face to face, wherever things get official, naturally, people are a lot more cautious. And that's where bizarre stuff happens, like, for example, the presentation of the Estonian e-state as foreign delegations receive it, not including any sort of challenges, not including any sort of problems, and so on. Whereas the Office of the Auditor General, for example, has been saying for several years now that there's practically no instance of local government in Estonia where they don't run unconnected parallel databases. So the whole thing, single data entry sort of thing, turns out to be a myth in practice. It's done at some level, yes, but by far not across all levels of government and so on. And if you are taking on the role, and Estonia, thankfully, is taking on this role of educating governments abroad and the rest of the world how to implement these things and how to work with these things, a bit more openness to the challenges and the flip side of these things would really be helpful. Because again, like I've for the last 2.5 years, I've been in the funny position that sometimes I've been contacted by embassies who had delegations coming, and they sent them to me last to basically double check on whether or not what they were told reflects actual fact. And in lots of cases, like I have people sitting there going like, but why don't they tell us about that? Like, why don't they mention this? And then the fact that they hadn't told them and that they found out later on undermined the trust that they had towards Estonia. So this kind of proneness to PR liabilities here is something that worries
actually,
me.
I don't know if you've seen that. There was a few years ago, Daniel Vavik went around the world and talked to a bunch of digital luminaries and was sort of checking in on sort of what's the perception reality myth. And one of the interesting languages that I still find myself using quite a bit is his suggestion coming out of that was that there is a high risk of becoming an e-Narnia.
Yeah.
Which basically the definition of e-Narnia is that you have this sort of faraway northern land behind the 7 seas, and snow is always falling, and I don't know, the deer can speak to the birds, and by the way, they have digital signatures and sort of. And the thing is that when that happens, like first of all, it's harder to position yourself into that fairy tale because like it's obviously a fairy tale, like it's not for mere humans. And secondly, like when you have this sort of loss of trust, then you sort of think that the entire thing is made up, right? And Daniel's suggestion was that instead of e-Narnia, the sort of right language is about being a pathfinder. Like, yes, we're 2 steps ahead, we are paving the way so that anybody who wants can follow. And by the way, if you're going first, you're occasionally going to triple.
Yeah.
And sort of this is how we fucked up here, and this is how we failed there, and sort of having that language. So actually, interestingly, that communication strategy exists. But what you're saying is that it's not like showing up in actual implementation, right?
No, it isn't.
Interesting.
Interesting.
Maris,
Yeah. Just also maybe to add and to recall another crisis. You mentioned it already briefly. Was that 2 years ago when we had this chip issue with a ID card?
Where we all became Nazis, the Swiss. According to Thomas Hendrik Ilves, we were all Nazis at that point.
I don't remember that episode, but that was a curious case where Estonian government and the tech sector, everyone was really worried that when this goes public, we are done with. All the trust is gone. And when this news broke finally, nobody cared. Absolutely nobody cared.
Nobody understood, bro.
Nobody understood, and especially the Germans were like, well, were you expecting it to work? Were you expecting it to be faultless? I mean, this is normal that things like that are broken. So sometimes we over-worry about this image as well.
But at the same time, Maris, don't you think that sort of this kind of PR, this sort of protecting us with this PR and sort of not talking about problems, does it not do a disservice for us?
Absolutely.
Because I recently visited Bratislava, Slovakia, and it was a pan-European journalist group. And what amazed me was that how honest the Slovakians were. And the same group did come to Estonia like a few years ago. And Estonia, I was also, following them and seeing what was told them. And it was very different, It was all like really positive talk. In Slovakia, everyone was very honest about the problems in the society as well. To be fair, they have some of the problems we don't have. Like the corruption is much worse. A journalist was murdered there, last year. Something like that has not happened in Estonia. But still, impressed me how honest they were. I mean, don't you think that we could be a bit more as well sometimes?
Well, it's up to everyone, of course, but sort of looking at the task that the government has here, like, I don't know, the Minister of Foreign Affairs or Enterprise Estonia, of course it's their job to promote the country. But then there are people reporting from Estonia, and obviously here my credibility is on the line, so I can't go around and not talking about the HIV epidemic or not talking about what's happening right now in the government. I talk about these issues as well.
But you just connected your credibility with the fact that you talk about these issues. And that's my point exactly. The credibility of Estonia on the whole is on the line wherever there is a refusal to talk about this sort of stuff.
I think there is a difference between active refusal or trying to cover up and maybe a different kind of ignorance about it. Like, for example, when I'm sitting in a VC office of a Silicon Valley investor and they ask me to talk about the Estonian startups, like...
That's not the topic that pops up in...
Or I don't know about it enough to even credibly talk about it.
That's obviously not the dimension I mean. The dimension I mean is where it's not mentioned by politicians, it's where it's not tackled in the form of new policy, where it's not really covered by the main papers of the country and so on, where it just kind of falls down somewhere and nobody really looks at it anymore. And it's more convenient that way. I understand it. Like you avoid the debate, which is fine, and maybe it'll just go away. But there are some topics where that is simply not the case.
Well, internationally, the picture is very different from what's happening here.
Yeah.
I mean, well, I guess everyone here in the audience is a frequent user of international media, but if you looked at Estonian online sites over the weekend or on Friday, there was not one single picture of the climate strike. Not one single picture. It didn't happen.
Yeah, and
how are we going to transport the issue here to the Estonian voters?
Yeah, but I think in a way this is a reflex, a very, very common reflex here, that you'd rather not put up with a particular problem, rather not look at a particular problem. in the hope that it might just blow over or solve itself in time. And quite often that might be the case, but in some cases that just isn't happening. But I think that's an attitude also that's generational, and that is slowly, hopefully disappearing, because the weird comment I made before about us Swiss all being Nazis, that goes back to a defensive reflex of our former president here. The business that committed the grave error or mistake or sloppy, whatever it was, with the ID cards is a Swiss company. And the CEO of the Swiss company here in Estonia is Swiss. And in an unprecedented display of a clash of Swiss business practices and Estonian business practices, what the guy didn't do was use the right contractual channels to inform the Estonian authorities about the potential problem. He wanted to help them save face and try to deposit the message informally. And later on wrote a very, very unlucky sort of LinkedIn update in which he said, well, maybe my message didn't arrive at the right person's hand because it was the summer. And summer in Estonia is always a bit slow. And Thomas Hendrik Ilves then flipped and basically said, yeah, of course, we're all just Eastern European Untermenschen and so on. And yeah, that's how we became Nazis. So it's not constructive. It's just not very constructive.
Just quickly, and by the way, we counted there are 22 different nationalities here represented today. So, but talking about the image, Dario, and reality, and now I'm getting political again. After this election in March, I remember you saying at first that, you know, when obviously before the ECRA I was included in the new government, that I don't, you know, remember exactly what you said, but I mean, I just tried to transfer the thought.
I predicted a coalition between the Centre Party and the Reform Party.
Yes, but I mean, after when ECRA was already invited, the point I want to make is that I think you said that, you know, we shouldn't be worried, or you know, I think you.
It's not what exactly I want to say. What I
think you undermined a little bit the danger of what ECRA's inclusion would actually pose to us in terms of the image.
The one course that I followed in my comments and so on, and in the reporting that we did at ERR News as well, is that we shouldn't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So basically, as long as there isn't actual legislative change that starts to threaten the rule of law and certain principles of the state and so on, let's not pretend as if it is already happening. And this is the thing, the curious thing about how the impact of the ECRA in the current coalition and the presence, as we have it here in the local media, there's again a big discrepancy to how it is reported abroad, because interest in it abroad is not actually that stellar. The reason why the international media tend to go haywire over stuff that's going on in Poland and in Hungary is because there the government has taken active steps to change election laws, to undermine the independence of the courts and so on and so forth. Active legislative, like literally steps on signed pieces of paper. And that hasn't happened here yet. And that's the sort of thing that I think we need to wait for before we declare this state on the way into its grave. So I don't quite agree with some of the level of pessimism.
I don't quite want to wait for that to happen, to be honest.
No, but you don't need to. That's the point. But there's one really important detail, and that is, if you look at it, I don't know. Maybe my angle is a little weird because I come from a completely politicized country. We've got direct democracy and so on. Every family is political. Every class is political. So, but the point is, if you look at the current lineup of the Riigikogu, you de facto have 90% center-left parties, center-left liberal in some cases, but 90% of the votes in the Riigikogu are not left-leaning. Even if you would take half of the Centre Party and half of the Reform Party, which is completely unrealistic, and say that we'll treat these people as left or leftist, we would still end up with a 60% center-right majority in Parliament. So I don't see why a political course of this country that's going towards a national conservative angle is so terribly surprising to some people. That's one thing. Second thing, from the point of view of an incorrigible leftist, I actually think it's quite a feat that at least a quasi-leftist is running a government that otherwise is national conservative. So I quite like that. And but what it is in practice, again, I think before you can declare anything as lost, you actually need to see it go down the drain. And at the moment, we're at the surface of this happening. We're not on the way down yet. And if you look at the ratings as well, a certain corrective movement is on the way as well.
I take an issue with ECRA being called conservative, but that's a different story.
National
I call them radical
I mean,
populists.
This is the thing.
But that's different.
This is another thing. Like the ideology there ranges from simple protest voters to absolutely disgusting neo-Nazis. Like this, it was bizarre. I was at their panel discussion at Arvamus Festival, where they talked about direct democracy. Because I went there because that interested me. And there was an old guy who got up in the audience and quoted Henrik Ibsen. Like, you wouldn't go to a neo-Nazi gathering in Switzerland and find somebody who can quote foreign literature. So I think it's important to keep in mind what sort of a mixed bag these people and their supporters still are.
Sure. But Sten, you travel around the world, and again, what's your experience since ECRA was included in government and obviously, in the background there are headlines which I brought also a few examples of. You meeting investors, other startups. Do they ask you what's happening in Estonia, based on what they read, or do they ask you, to tell me, what's really happening?
I think interestingly enough, this indirect wave is less important. Like I was living in California when Crimea happened. And then obviously, like, there is a high peak of, okay, how far are the tanks now? Like, I worried, like, this sort of, and then it fades away and all that. Where my main short-term tactical, if I may, worry lies is that we've had a startup visa for 2 years. Like, the growth in the sort of tech sector that I was explaining before has been a fantastic opener of doors that I think that the doors should be opened anyway to create a more diverse, sort of more interesting, more multifaceted society. And over the last 2 years, with the thing that we got sorted out with the government is, again, government getting out of the way. Is like, if you're a highly qualified tech worker and you make a few times of Estonian average salary, like, you get the living permits expedited. So that's the startup visa. And now we have, I think, 1,500, approaching 2,000 people by the end of this year who have moved to Estonia on the promise of Estonia, and like yourself, and
I didn't do
but still, like, the same, looking from outside.
Yeah,
oh, this is something
right.
interesting. There are interesting jobs. I can work from Estonia, serve global customers, and sort of challenge myself. And that group of people is now here. And I cherish the fact that we have been able to attract that crowd, and there are more people applying. This summer I was hiring for Topia. We hired, I think, 19 people to the Tallinn office, and I think 4 joined from Estonia. And so people are moving from Uzbekistan and India and Sri Lanka and the US, and sort of, like, there's this massive movement. And now this summer, when you talk to the candidates, and at some point they're already getting, like, the qualified interviews and all of that, and then they Google, and then they go read the news. And then you have to have that sort of forced conversation of how bad is it really? And like, in all sort of hopes and dreams, you want to say that, okay, yeah, there is some fringe movement in the politics and there's a lot of noise, but, like, still our employees who are different skin color live happily here and will take good care of you and figure it all out. And then you hear the stories from this startup's taxi driver threw some French employee out of the cab because they were there with an Estonian girl. Or there's Karel Kotkas from Veriff this weekend gave an interview where one of his major customers landed on the 24th of February, Estonian Independence Day, and there were all these angry people with tiki torches on the streets and telling him to get out, like when he was asking for the way to the hotel. And like every single one of those stories, like you want to believe and you want to feel that it's an isolated incident, but this is where sort of it starts to matter who's in the government, because that's the difference between sort of true leadership and leading people somewhere and having a view of the future versus and to your point of not speaking of problems, I do believe that there's, in our current sitting government, there's probably a vast majority of people who actually dislike those behaviors as well, but currently it's politically cooler not to speak out about that, and there is like no leadership on values, and that gap is what starts to show up immediately for me.
Yeah, and I think that's actually spot on, the point with leadership in terms of values, because so far this wasn't necessary. There has been some sort of a silent consensus that Estonia is heading towards a more open society anyway. Unfortunately, that silent consensus was not based on a broader debate in society, which is the tricky part, and that's where some people get left out and where resentment builds up and so on. The question to me, like looking at all of this, is how could this have been avoided? What could be done in order to bring in a sort of a regulative, an effect that would kind of balance it all out? And like as Estonia is seen as the digital one-trick pony, I mean, at least I'm not the chocolate and mountains and cheese one-trick pony here, but I'm the direct democracy one-trick pony, because like we've literally had the same unchanged political system since 1848. We've had a communist movement that failed. We've had a Nazi movement that failed, and I think a big reason why Switzerland ended up being as stable and in many ways, unfortunately, also as dreadfully boring as it is basically because there is the public discourse, there is the opportunity to fight this stuff out before it reaches the political level. And in that sense, again, to hark back to that weird moment of that direct democracy debate with EKRE, with Poolamets and Vooglaid and so on at Arvamusfestival, these people, as absurd as I find their social convictions and political convictions, are actually ready to have that debate. They're actually ready to fight it out on even terms. I have not detected any kind of willingness that would be even remotely comparable on the local left or the center here to do that, because of the conviction. I'm a member of the Social Democratic Party in Switzerland, so
Dario.
Because based on the conviction that we just know we're right?
Maris, what you got to answer that?
I mean,
Street fighter.
In terms of direct democracy, we are currently witnessing like the greatest madness that EU has experienced.
Brexit is not direct democracy. It has nothing whatsoever to do with direct democracy.
But
you realize that.
This is a great example of direct democracy for the Estonian populists, anyway.
Well, not all of them. That's the thing.
But okay, Catherine,
I
want to.
would not want to be a test person for this.
Okay, Catherine, the politically what has happened in Estonia, has that somehow changed your view of Estonia? I know you also care about those issues.
Well, I mean, on election day, I was like very angry and sad and worried and this kind of mixed feelings. But I think I don't think that hatred or anger brings us any further. So, and that is what I don't really like about like all the discussions, because they're so heated up in every aspect, and we love to talk about each other, and it feels like we're in kind of a war, like in a language war, word war. We fight for this, we fight against that, and I think that doesn't help anyone. So I think we should like start communicating with each other again, and like talk to each other and not talk about the others. So I think that it's very difficult. It's tough because it's not very easy to get all the parties on one table. But I mean, I agree with Maris, because I don't want to be like this test object in in kind of a, okay, let's see if the country is going down. No, I don't want to see that. So I rather stand up and be an advocate for something I stand for something that my values are, and then probably values are of many other people in this country who stand for diversity and openness.
Thank you. But let's take some questions from the audience. And Nele, my colleague, will come to you with a microphone. Please introduce yourself as well and try to be as specific as possible with your question. Thank you.
My name is Manan. I can speak up. It's no
We'll bring you another microphone. Just a second. Sorry about that.
Hello.
Yeah,
Can hear you
go.
My question is to Dario. My name is Manan. I'm originally from Pakistan. I've been in Estonia for about 5 years now. I'm a mechanical engineer. My question is to Dario. You mentioned a lot about sweeping things under the rug as a tendency in Estonia. And I really, really agree with that, because I haven't seen it on a state level, but I have seen it on a societal and personal level, because it's a total erosion where people are unable to have discourse at all, having a discussion about difficult topics. So my question is, why do you think this is the case at the level that you saw? And could it be because in a single lifespan, Estonia has seen itself grow to be a very success story, and anytime somebody brings that out, something that is probably considered negative, people think that it might tend to threaten their identity of a unicorn state? That's my question. Thank you.
Well, I think this is one of these cases where you cannot confuse a potential justification with an explanation. So what I'm going to try and do is explain, because I think this is a really important thing that should be repeated over and over again in connection with Estonia. If you take Estonia's biography over the last 115 to 200 years, you had Russification in the Russian Empire, serfdom. Estonians were literally owned by the German and Russian top layer of society. Then the War of Independence, the first phase of Estonian independence, or the first time of Estonian independence, the First Republic. Then you had Nazi occupation, Russian occupation, and so on. And then, of course, half a century under Soviet rule. If you sum up the sheer amount of robbery, killing, violence, trauma of all of this, and if you translate this, and a society, in a way, is the sum of its individuals. If you translate this into a view where you look at Estonia as a person, as we're sometimes wont to do with countries anyway, you would talk about an obvious case of post-traumatic stress disorder, and you wouldn't expect of anyone who's gone through all of this to just be brilliant and fine like that. I mean, there is resentment, there are family histories, like in Silver's presentation before the Estonia came up, the ferry that sank. There was virtually no family in this country that wasn't affected. Similar things can be said about the war in Afghanistan fought by the Soviet army, and so on and so forth. So Estonia is not a large enough country to stomach all of these things thrown in its general direction just like that. So you are talking about generations of attempts at processing this. And this is where I absolutely adore this country. And one of my reasons why I'm never going to move away from here is simply because of the determination and the tenacity and the optimism with which the people here are dealing with their problems. And they are. The only downside for us, of course, we are recent arrivals. I mean, I've been here for 13 years, and occasionally I get asked if I would file for citizenship, if dual citizenship would be possible for me to keep my Swiss passport. And my answer is no, very plainly because I don't think this is a club that I need to join or that would accept me as I am right now. If you look at the Estonian state, society, history, narrative, everything is fused. Everything is one and the same thing. Whereas if you look at Switzerland, as I said before, 170 plus years of the same state, 700 years of quasi-democratic situations and so on within the existing borders, like what's there to be fused? Systems come and go. The actual situation of the country hasn't changed. This is not the case here. This hasn't been the case for this long. And so I reckon all of this just needs a lot more time. The only problem, of course, is that in one-to-one social interactions with Estonians, and I know this because I've been married to one for 12 years, and most of my friends here are not expats but locals, and it is extremely difficult. But it's the same sort of thing. I'll defend my direct democracy and my trees and my mountains with the same fervor as people will defend their way of life and their outlook here. If that means that I have to slow down and take everything in baby steps, by now my learning curve tells me that I don't have any other choice to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions? Just raise your hand. Yeah, question over here.
Hi, it's really just a general question, because I am British. My name is Piers Coke-Wallace, and the perception of Estonia in the UK is that not that many people know where it is, even. And I frequently get asked, well, where do you live? And I've been here for nearly 15 years. So how would you propose that perception is changed in the minds of the UK general public?
Who's supposed to answer? I mean, I can quickly answer it myself. I lived in.
As I say, it's a general question.
I lived in England for over 10 years, and I remember when I first moved there. Yes, not only that, they didn't know where Estonia was. They didn't, they thought we were still part of Russia or spoke in Russian back in 2002, 2003. But I have to say that it started to change gradually, at least in London. And especially towards the sort of end of the, noughties, sort of, 2009, 10, around that time, I think. Well, again, at that time, I worked with a lot of professional people, and then, of course, they traveled more, knew more about tech and stuff. So I guess I was living in a bubble by that time. But how to change that? I mean, it's not really for us to change. I think that's really a question for British, and I think it comes down to education system in Britain. I'm sorry.
It's basically
exactly my point. I mean, would your friends know where it is if you would say I live in Albania or Montenegro? I guess the answer would not.
I'm astonished by the responses that I get. It may well be that sort of a general lack of education.
It's also about the British class system, I think, because you have this huge working class who's less educated quite often, and I mean not necessarily, of course. When they travel, they learn about the countries. So it's again, I remember meeting more and more those British people who had actually traveled to Estonia when the cheap budget airlines started flying, like I mentioned EasyJet before, but also Ryanair and stuff. And you could meet more and more people. Oh, I was in Tallinn, it's a beautiful old town and so. But
bring the stag nights back.
Stag nights, yeah. But the other thing we could do, of course, on a pan-European level. But again, Britain will be out from that, as we know.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Well, I hope not. I mean, it's really sad. But I mean, perhaps across Europe we could maybe introduce a sort of pan-European curriculum so that we could learn more about EU member states,
Silver, the single most successful project of EU has been Erasmus, and I think everyone who has gone through this program knows more about the whole European world than anybody else. And a great project they reintroduced was actually free grants for Interrail. I know this summer some young Swedish relatives were traveling on train around Europe. So things like that would help. But yes, UK is a special case here, I think, because in Germany this rarely happens. Of course, has to do with historic proximity and general less large part of the world to look out for.
I think,
Yeah.
I
No,
think
back in my day, the Erasmus, not many people did that back in my day.
I reckon it's a matter of perspective as well.
Yeah.
If you grow up in the country that once steered the biggest empire in world history, of course the perspective is quite different.
Yes.
In our case, it's a small state pitted against the rest of Europe. So obviously, I wouldn't. I mean, I had to learn all the rivers and states and state capitals in the U.S., for example. Goodness knows what for.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't expect somebody in America to learn all of the Swiss cantons by heart.
But it does remind me. I've got one very positive story, and that was in 2003. I think I worked for a short time in a very small village in the north of England, in Lake District. The village was called Glenreading. 300 people, I think they had roughly, and there was a lake there, and they had old steamboats on the lake. So I took, for pleasure rides, and I took that steamboat one day. And I started speaking to that steamboat's captain. And he asked me where I'm from, and I said, from Estonia. And I said, oh, from Estonia, Arvo Pärt is from Estonia. So, in that little village, the steamboat captain actually knew Arvo Pärt. He said, oh, he's got all these records, And so, there are examples like that, of course. And that shows, again, that some people learn about Estonia through cultural figures, So there you go.
But your overall point is very, very valid. I mean, that should be the starting point of any discussion on this topic. Yes. Yes. We always consider Estonia to be the center of the world, but sadly it's...
I'm just saying what I've come across from my 15 years of going back to very regularly.
Yeah, we've got a question here.
Yeah, I am Sirje Kiin, journalist and literary scientist. I have lived 15 last years in US and teaching literature in Canada, some universities every year. So my experience has been one aspect which has been not brought up today. Everybody from Estonia becomes a big Russian expert when you move to the other side of the globe. And everywhere in universities, they want me not to talk about literature. They want me to talk, how did you collapse the Soviet Union? That's a question number one. Then number two is, tell me what is the border, what you mentioned, what is the border situation, where are the tanks, how much provocations happening in the border, how can you go to the forest to pick up mushrooms when they are right there, this type of questions, even from journalists. But I have some other personal stories to tell you. I was golfing with one American lady, and we have a military unit in South Dakota where I live. By the way, they will rotate soon in November into Estonia. And and she said that his son recently was moved from Italy to Estonia as a NATO soldier. And I asked this mother of this soldier, how is it? What is the son writing about this move? Does he like it? And mother was overwhelmed from happiness because son is so happy. What is better in Estonia than in Italy? Guess what? Much more beautiful girls and much better food. That was the main conclusion, and I have heard this a lot from other people also. For example, my husband, who is 10th generation American, 1/8 Seminole, came here 15 years ago first time, and he was convinced that this is some kind of model festival going on here. And then he came next year, and still model festival going on here. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Hi. My name is Nick. I've been in Estonia for 12 years or so. I'd like to ask the panel, and perhaps Daria in particular, As I am living the train wreck of Brexit from a distance, I would like to know what would have had to be done to make Brexit, to break the EU referendum, a true direct democracy process.
Following the Swiss model, there would have had to be 2 votes. The first one would have been, do we give the government the mandate to negotiate an exit from the European Union, yes or no? That would have been the first vote, and the second vote would have been on the negotiated deal. Rejection of the deal would have meant a no to Brexit on the whole. That would have been direct democracy.
So then does the, let's just say the hypothetical second referendum, would that make it a more direct democracy process, or?
No, because they're not voting on a deal. It's pointless.
Okay, thank you.
But this is, I think this is also a much wider question about the involvement of tech, social media. You go into the Cambridge Analytica stuff and things like that. I mean, it's global questions about the viability of democracy in the age where big tech companies control what we read, what we see, what we think, and these are companies that don't have a democratic legitimation.
Okay, we've got time for another question. If anyone wants to ask anything, yeah.
Wait, hello, I'm from Beijing. Chinese. I'm studying opera here. So I want to ask. The first time my parents heard about Estonia, it was about. He asked, where this country is in Africa? Because, you know, this ending of the name, Nia, Kenya, Nigeria, you know, this kind of name. So, actually, that's not the first time I heard it, but I want to ask about what your takes on this Belt and Road initiative, which actually Estonia is also part of it right now. Because I've been watching the media, and there have been a lot of negative news about China. And there used to be there's an article about how the Helsinki-Tallinn tunnel got a Chinese investment, got to be threatened the Estonian society or something. And these people who got interviewed is so-called a China expert, but actually I happen to know he's just tour guide here. So I think this lack of acknowledgement about both countries is kind of the problem now, but I don't really understand the negative tones about it.
And is it a bit a wider question about China's image? It's really, I mean, today's topic is Estonia's image, but it's interesting question in a way that that a Chinese image, or image of China,
yeah,
to be precise, is changing a bit, doesn't it?
Right.
And also in Estonia, I guess. Yeah, I mean, someone wants to comment on that.
I think first thing that comes to mind, I was thinking about the question about British perception of Estonia or the lack of knowledge where it is. Peter Westerbacka, who's the Finnish guy building the tunnel between Helsinki and Tallinn, he has a great answer to that one. It's like, what do you mean Estonia and Finland are on the outskirts of Europe? Just zoom out. It's smack in the middle of Eurasia. So it's like, you just need to recalibrate it. I think in that sense, I think Finns are playing that angle or shifting the view of the world much better. Like if you look at the sort of plane connectivity from China, from Japan, Southeast Asia, India, the destinations that connect to Finland to go to the rest of Europe, I think culturally or mentally, I think Estonia does have a chance of doing that. I think the volume of that activity is still way lower, and I don't know, it starts with a tiny airport or something else, but I think there's genuine curiosity for Estonians, like geographically, not to only look towards Europe, but also look the other way. And there is this neighbor that doing business with is kind of a known territory, but there is some territories behind that, and that what makes, I think, China very intriguing. I personally know more businessmen trying to set up things with Japan. There is some other cultural proximity there, language-wise and whatnot, that seems to click easier. And for an Estonian business person to go to the first meeting in Shanghai is way harder to read what the other side is thinking. So,
And just quickly add, because you mentioned Japan, I think, and I mean, I didn't touch that in my presentation, but what I've heard from Japanese, many Japanese people, is that Estonia's image in Japan apparently is very positive. That in Japan, Estonia is perceived as Nordic, whereas in some other, old kind of, even in old Europe, sometimes it's still perceived as sort of Eastern European. And partly, I mean, again, that could have been in a presentation, but there was this sumo wrestler called Paruto who made Estonia famous in Japan, apparently. So yeah.
So we haven't had an Estonian athlete in Chinese sports.
Yeah, but I reckon all of this is spot on, because it's about how used European countries, including Estonia, are to the idea of Chinese investment coming here, because naturally for 20, 30 years it's been going the other way. Now it's coming our way. Like in Switzerland, for example, which is, again, small state and so on, it's absolute panic because, Jesus Christ, the Chinese are buying our largest construction company. Like, it was owned by the French before that. That didn't bother us. So I reckon it's just, again, it's a learning curve. It's about getting used to the idea that China is becoming an economic player here in Europe, where it isn't already one. So.
And also, I just want to mention that if you actually search Estonia in Chinese, there's literally only positive news, right? If you do that, if you're actually reading, I mean,
you mean when you search in China about Estonia?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes. If you type in Chinese, there are only positive news. I'm not talking about those self-media players. I'm just saying the officials and the big media presses, and they're only positive. And that's why I'm talking about, okay, what's going on,
Although the Estonian government is going to great lengths to keep things positive as well about China, has been for a long time.
But okay, we gonna slowly start to wrap up, but we didn't touch branding. And shortly before we finish, I mean, I was a bit sarcastic about the puking hedgehog, but and I think you've probably been as well in the past. But what should be changed when it comes to Estonia's branding? And this is the job of obviously our agencies, like Enterprise Estonia and stuff. What would you change? I mean, is there something that we have not highlighted about Estonia, or we haven't advertised enough, or what have we done wrong, or what would you do differently? Who wants to start?
I'll be short. I don't care about branding at all.
Because the worry is something else, right?
I care about people and stories, and I can't sell a brand. I can tell a story about someone. I can tell a story about an artist. I can tell a story about an entrepreneur, a singer, a mother.
That's what's missing in the brand.
And
that is precisely what's missing.
What font it is in, or what color filter, I don't care.
What we've got now is we've got a top-down sort of visual concept that doesn't really have much else to go with it. That's my main beef with it. Everything is represented in a dark or in a blue tint, which I don't know about everybody else, but to me looks horrendously depressing. And all that Riga and Latvia need to do is pit themselves against it as a fun destination, and we're screwed. But basically, make it more positive and optimistic, in the sense, not only say good stuff about Estonia, but there's a lot of fun stuff to do here. And why not talk about that? Why always try to make it atmospheric? That's what I don't get. And
have you seen Estonian movies?
But there we go.
I think what makes brands work is that they are authentic. Like, you can't lie about the country being something, or a product, or a person, or whatnot. And so in that sense, there is like a slight risk of making Estonia look very overly sunny. And
no, I don't think so. I really don't think so. Like I've been repeating this ad nauseum for years. The whole story of Estonians being so horrendously rude is a myth. Because think about just one example. If you try to learn this language and you try to speak to a local in Estonian with your horrendous foreign accent, what happens? They switch to English immediately. They're too nice. You don't even get a chance to learn their language. They're so nice. So I don't see where this incredible negativity comes from, where everybody talks about how grim everyone is and how depressing and angry and quiet and goodness. This is not how I've
The
experienced
happiness
the
index
country.
shows we're not the happiest of bunch, right?
But
Finland
neither-
apparently is number 1. Estonia is 63.
Fake it till you make it.
No, having worked with some American human resources people who have pointed out that what was just said in a 400-person chat might not have been culturally appropriate, there is that element of Estonian darkness as well that needs some
Yeah,
translation.
but that doesn't need to be negative only either.
Katharina, do you want to add something?
Well, I think Estonia is quite good in self-promoting, but I agreed we should tell more stories about actual people here.
I've got one more question, and actually this is I just made up now. But if you, because talking about headlines, you know, what I had lots of them in a presentation. If you think like, let's say 5 years from now on, what's the sort of international headline you would like to see about Estonia? What's the dream headline?
My dream headline comes much, much earlier. And that would be Estonia back to normal.
Stagnation, fine-tuning.
And to translate that, Maris probably means here getting rid of the current government, right?
Getting rid of the far right in the government.
Far right.
Yes.
I think we had Estonia has this, or like in this branding story, has this slogan of positively surprising, and I think it would be nice to have a still positively surprising.
Dara, Östen?
Honestly, I might have looked at too many headlines over the last 4 years. I can't think of one. But what I would hope is that that all of the small businesses and the small companies that are very active in Estonia that produce something else than electronics and digital products, that they will get more attention as well, and that some of the clever and very nice ideas that are being developed there get more attention. I'd like to see that.
Who should do that? Government?
No, not necessarily.
Yeah. No, I mean, for me it would be intriguing. I think getting inspired by your earlier point is that sort of the talking about problems with solutions. I think our sort of commercial industries are well on the way and things are happening and so forth. But now taking and solving some big sort of, I think, educational frontier or healthcare frontier or something, child poverty, something with the use of the brains that now we have accumulated in the country, and sort of presenting it. The headline should present it, okay, here's one that you can now take and borrow and run with it.
Yes, no, really. I mean, to be serious, actually something in terms of the climate and energy issues, where if we could move on in that sector, could forgive a lot of things.
Okay. By the way, before I forget, there's a new Estonian movie in the cinemas right now called Chasing Unicorns, and that is about how the startup scene sort of started off here. I haven't actually watched it yet, but I heard it's good. And that's directed by one of the startup entrepreneurs called Rain Rannu, who founded a company called Fortumo, also one of the most successful ones. And just in light of what we talked about here, you know, about the startup scene, so that impacted Estonia's image for many years and still does. So maybe, you know, if you want to watch that movie, I believe it's in Coca-Cola Plaza where it has got English subtitles as well.
It's hilarious, and in terms of self-promotion, my dog does a major role in there. So.
Okay, but thank you, Katharina, thank you, Maris, thank you, Sten, thank you, Daria, and we are Astonishing Evenings. Also, thank you for Telliskivi Creative City, who is supporting this event and always supported us. And thank you, Nele and Lene. And if you want to keep up what we're doing next, then just follow Astonishing Evenings Facebook page. And you can also watch that by stream afterwards. And sorry, Nele, are we meeting afterwards? No, not tonight. Sometimes we have after sort of drinks after party, but we don't have tonight apparently. So, so thank you again, and thank you for coming, and good night.